The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched upward like a cathedral built by giants. Thousands of seats spiraled around a central platform, each one designed for a different species. Some seats held massive creatures that looked like living mountains. Others held tiny beings no bigger than a human child. The air recyclers worked constantly, mixing atmospheres so that everyone could breathe. Translation devices hummed softly, turning thousands of different languages into something each species could understand. Ambassador Jaeger of the Krenan Empire settled into her seat, her forearms adjusting her ceremonial robes. She had attended council sessions for 70 years. The routine never changed much. Today would be another long day of debates, votes, and diplomatic speeches that said much but meant little. She glanced around the chamber as other ambassadors arrived. The mother delegates floated in, their gas-filled environment suits gleaming. The Torx representatives stomped in on their 6 legs, making the floor vibrate. The Pelthines slithered to their heated seats, their scales reflecting the chamber lights. Jor noticed something odd. Section 7 Beta, where the human delegation usually sat, was empty. The seats designed for their smaller frames stood vacant. She checked her chronometer. The session would begin in 10 minutes. Humans were often running late, always hurrying from one place to another, like their short lives made them panic about wasting time. They would probably rush in at the last moment, apologizing as usual. The chamber filled up. The warning chime sounded. High Chancellor Vormek, a towering Dravine, whose ancestors had founded the council 8,000 years ago, rose to begin the session. His voice boomed across the chamber, translated instantly into every language. Honored members of the Galactic Council, we gather again to guide our unified civilization forward. Let us begin with Chancellor. One of the administrative staff, a Peltine named Sir, slithered quickly onto the floor. Apologies for the interruption, but an urgent message has arrived. Formcake's 3 eyes narrowed. Interrupting the opening ceremony was almost unheard of. This had better be important, Administrator. It concerns the human delegation. Chancellor Jor felt a small flutter of interest. Around the chamber, other ambassadors perked up slightly. The humans were always causing some small drama or another. Are they delayed again? Formk asked with barely hidden irritation. Inform them that we will proceed without. They are not delayed, Chancellor. They have withdrawn from the council. Silence fell across the massive chamber. Thousands of beings representing hundreds of species stopped moving. Even the constant background hum of translation devices seemed to quiet. Withdrawn. Vormek repeated the word like he had never heard it before. Yes, Chancellor. A formal notice arrived 3 hours ago through official diplomatic channels. Humanity has withdrawn from all council territories, alliances, and treaties. The withdrawal is effective immediately. Jor leaned forward in her seat. This was unexpected. Species rarely left the council. It had only happened 5 times in 8,000 years, and usually only after major conflicts or catastrophic internal problems. Vormek gestured for the message to be displayed. The chamber's central projection system came to life, showing a simple text document. It was surprisingly brief. To the Galactic Council, after 200 years of membership, humanity has decided to withdraw from all council agreements and territories. This decision is final. All human personnel, ships, and installations will be removed from council space within 72 hours. We thank the council for the opportunity to participate and wish all member species well. Humanity will maintain a neutral stance and request that all species respect human territorial boundaries. No further communication on this matter will be necessary. That was it. No explanation, no list of grievances, no dramatic declarations, just a simple, polite notice that they were leaving. The chamber erupted in noise. Ambassadors called out questions and comments in hundreds of languages, creating a chaos of sound that even the translators struggled with. Cora found herself puzzled. She had never particularly liked humans, but she had never hated them either. They were simply there. They held various minor positions throughout the council structure. They were always busy, always moving, always involved in a dozen small projects, but they had never seemed important enough to cause this kind of reaction by leaving. Vormek raised his primary arms, calling for silence. It took several minutes for the chamber to quiet down. Does anyone have information about why humanity has taken this action? He asked. The Thorax Ambassador Grolnog stood up on his 6 legs. Perhaps we offended them somehow. Humans are notoriously emotional. They take offense at small things. Or maybe they realized they never belonged here in the first place, offered Ambassador Kelvarn of the Mothers. Her voice came through her suit speakers with a hollow quality. They were always different, too individualistic, too chaotic. They never fully accepted council protocols. Shethor had to admit this was true. Humans had a reputation for bending rules, finding loopholes, and doing things their own way. They said they followed orders, but they always added their own interpretation. Council law said to do things one way, and humans would do it differently, claiming their method was more efficient, or saved lives, or some other justification. Perhaps this is for the best, suggested Ambassador Thmi of the Quilani Collective. Without the human element introducing constant variables into our systems, operations may run more smoothly. Many ambassadors made gestures of agreement. Jathor found herself nodding along. Yes, perhaps this was not a crisis, but an opportunity. The council had existed for thousands of years before humanity joined. It would continue long after. Very well, Vormek declared. Let the record show that humanity has withdrawn from the council. We will redistribute their assigned responsibilities among existing members. Administrator Sir, prepare a list of human-held positions and duties. Already prepared. Chancellor Sir brought up another display. Jor scanned the list. It was longer than she expected. Humans had their manipulative little appendages in quite a few areas, but as she read, she felt reassured. These were all minor positions. Nothing critical. Infrastructure, maintenance, coordination. That sounded boring. They probably just filed reports about broken equipment. Cultural liaison services. Every species had cultural liaison. Humans handled some of them. Others would take over. Translation system administration. Well, the automatic systems did most of the work anyway. Disaster response coordination. How hard could that be? You show up to a disaster and help. Simple trade route optimization. Ships knew how to fly. Routes were routes. Diplomatic mediation services. Now, this one made Jathor pause. She had seen humans mediating minor disputes between species. They had a strange talent for it, somehow understanding what different species wanted, even when those species could barely understand each other. But surely, this was not essential. Species could talk to each other directly. These positions can be easily filled, Vormek announced. I see no cause for concern. The council is built on the strength of hundreds of species. The loss of one, particularly one that never fully integrated, changes nothing fundamental. More gestures of agreement rippled through the chamber. Now then, Vormek continued, let us proceed with today's agenda. First item, the proposed expansion of mining rights in sector. Chancellor Cyrus interrupted again. Reports are coming in from multiple council facilities. Human personnel are evacuating their posts. Of course they are. They said they would leave within 72 hours. Yes, but they are leaving very quickly. Station 79 reports that all human staff departed within the last hour. Base. Thalon says the humans packed up an entire research facility in 40 minutes. The speed is unusual. Vormek waved a dismissive hand. Humans are always in a hurry. Let them leave quickly if they wish. Better than having them linger. Continue monitoring and ensure they take nothing that belongs to the council. Yes, Chancellor. The session continued. They debated mining rights. They discussed trade agreements. They voted on environmental regulations. It was all very normal. Jothar even forgot about the humans for stretches of time. Her attention focused on the complex political maneuvering that made up council business. When the session finally ended 8 hours later, she returned to her diplomatic quarters. Her staff had prepared reports for her to review. As she read through them, she found several mentions of human departures from various facilities. One report caught her attention. It was from the Council's Central Translation Hub, a massive facility that processed real-time translation for thousands of simultaneous communications across Council space. The hub's director, a methodical Kanani named Pin, had filed a concerned note. All human technicians departed the Central Translation Hub at 14:37 today. They said goodbye to colleagues and wished us well. Before leaving, they attempted to provide training documents and system notes to remaining staff. We informed them this was unnecessary, as the translation systems are fully automated and require minimal oversight. They seemed concerned but did not argue. Note: Humans have been maintaining several subroutines in the translation matrix that are not in the standard documentation. Attempting to locate records of these subroutines, Jathor felt a small twinge of unease. Then she dismissed it. Humans were always worried about little details. The translation systems had been working for thousands of years. They would be fine. She moved to her communication console and sent a message to an old colleague, Ambassador Rethavar of the Peltine, who served on the Council Security Committee. "Did you notice anything strange about the human withdrawal?" she wrote. His reply came quickly. "Strange in what way?" "It seemed very efficient, almost like they had been planning it." "That's what I thought. Very organized for such an emotional species. Perhaps they were more competent than we gave them credit for. Or perhaps they simply wanted to leave before causing more problems. Either way, they're gone now. Good riddance, I say. They never fit in." Jor agreed and went to sleep that night, thinking a little more about it. Across council space and thousands of locations, the same scene played out. Humans said goodbye to colleagues. They packed their belongings with startling efficiency. They transferred access codes and closed accounts. They boarded their ships and left. On research stations, human scientists departed in the middle of ongoing experiments. In medical facilities, human doctors finished their shifts and did not return. On council military bases, human liaison officers filed their final reports and departed. In diplomatic offices, human translators and cultural advisors cleaned out their desks. Some of their colleagues asked them why they were leaving. The humans gave polite, vague answers. "Time to go home. We've been away too long. Humanity is taking a new direction." Nothing specific, nothing angry. A few humans seemed sad. Some seemed relieved, but all of them left. Within 72 hours, as promised, not a single human remained in council space. Every human ship, every human station, every human outpost withdrew to human territory. The borders of human space, previously open to council ships, suddenly showed automated warnings. Council vessels are no longer permitted in human space. This is not a hostile act. We simply wish to be left alone. Any ships approaching will be escorted back to council territory. Thank you for understanding. In the council chambers, High Chancellor Vormek stood alone after everyone else had left. He looked at the empty seats in Section 7 Beta. 200 years ago, when humans had first joined the council, there had been celebration. Humans brought interesting technology, strange ideas, and boundless energy. They had seemed so eager to be part of something bigger than themselves. Now they were gone, and Vormek felt something he did not want to examine too closely. It was not quite relief, not quite concern, something in between. He shook his head and turned away. The council had endured for 8,000 years. It would endure this too. Behind him, the lights in the human section automatically dimmed and went dark, controlled by a timer that no one had thought to reset. In the darkness, the empty chairs waited. They would continue waiting for a very long time. 3 months had passed since humanity withdrew from the council. Ambassador Jawar had almost forgotten about them. Life continued as normal. The council met, debated, and voted on matters of galactic importance. Trade continued. Ships traveled between worlds. The daily business of running a civilization that spanned thousands of systems carried on, almost normal. Jether sat in her office reviewing the morning reports when she noticed something odd. A message from the Torax embassy had come through her translation system garbled. She read it 3 times and still could not understand what Ambassador Grinog was trying to tell her. She activated her communication system. "This is Ambassador Jethor. I received your message, Grolnog, but I'm afraid the translation is unclear. Could you resend?" Grolnog's image appeared on her screen. "That's strange. I'll send it again." The second message arrived. It was also garbled, but in a different way. Words seemed to be translated correctly, but the meaning made no sense. It was like someone had taken a perfectly normal message and scrambled the word order. "I'm still not getting it clearly," Jawar said. Grolnog's 6 eyes blinked in confusion. "Let me try speaking directly instead of using text." His voice came through her speakers. "Can you understand me now?" "Yes, perfectly." "Good. I was trying to tell you that we need to reschedule our trade negotiation meeting." The written message should have been simple. After they ended the call, Josor filed a maintenance report about the translation system. She thought little more about it. But over the next week, she received 17 more garbled messages from different ambassadors. Some were barely understandable. Others made no sense at all. One message from the Canny Collective somehow came through, translated into Ancient Draven, a language that had not been commonly used for 3,000 years. She was not alone. Across the council, ambassadors and officials started reporting translation problems. The issues were minor at first. A word mistranslated here, a phrase garbled there. Nothing that stopped work from getting done, but annoying enough to slow things down. The council's technical staff investigated. They ran diagnostics on the central translation hub. Everything checked out. The systems were working normally. The master translation matrix showed no errors. Yet, the problems continued. "It makes no sense," Administrator Sir told a gathering of concerned ambassadors. "The system is functioning within normal parameters. These errors should not be happening. Perhaps we need to rebuild the translation databases," suggested a Metherian technician. "That would take years and require shutting down the central hub for months. Then what do we do?" Nobody had a good answer. The translation problems were annoying, but they were not the only issue. Jor started hearing complaints from shipping companies. Trade routes that had run like clockwork for decades were experiencing delays. Ships arrived late. Cargo manifest did not match what was actually delivered. Shipments meant for one world ended up at another. Captain Thielvan of the merchant vessel Silverwing came to see her personally. He was a Paline trader who had been running the same route between Crane Space and the core worlds for 40 years. "Something's wrong with the routing systems," he told her, his scales rippling with agitation. "I've been filing the same flight plans for decades now. Suddenly, I'm being rerouted through sectors that add 3 days to my journey. When I question it, the system tells me it's the most efficient route, but it's not. I know these routes. Have you filed a complaint with the Navigation Authority?" 5 times. "They keep telling me to trust the system, but the system is wrong." Jakor promised to look into it, but she did not know what she could do. Navigation was not her area. Still, the complaint bothered her. More complaints arrived. Food shipments spoiling because they took too long to arrive. Medical supplies delayed until after they were needed. Raw materials for manufacturing arriving in the wrong order, forcing factories to shut down while they waited for missing components. The Council's economic advisors reported that trade efficiency had dropped by 8%. It did not sound like much, but across thousands of worlds, 8% meant billions of credits lost and millions of beings affected. "What's causing this?" High Chancellor Vormek demanded at an emergency economic session. "We're still investigating," replied Economic Director Plinth. "The routing algorithms appear to be functioning, but they're not optimized anymore. It's as if someone turned off an efficiency layer we didn't know existed, then turn it back on. We're trying to find it, Chancellor, but there's no record of any efficiency layer in the navigation documentation." Something cold settled in Jor's stomach. She thought about the Translation Hub Director's report from 3 months ago, the one about humans maintaining undocumented subroutines. Before she could pursue that thought, news arrived of a crisis on the frontier world of Belak 7. A diplomatic incident had erupted between the local Torax population and a group of Metheran colonists. The details were complicated, involving water rights, traditional territories, and cultural misunderstandings. The two groups had been living together peacefully for 30 years. Now, they were on the brink of violence. The Council dispatched mediators. 3 experienced diplomats, each with decades of experience, arrived to resolve the situation. They lasted 2 days before admitting defeat. "We can't make them understand each other," Ambassador Rethar reported back. He had been one of the mediators. The Torax claimed the Metherians insulted their ancestors with a new construction project. The Metherians say the project was approved through proper channels, and they meant no offense. "We've explained each side to the other a dozen times, but they just get angrier. This should be simple," Vormek said. "Find the source of the misunderstanding and resolve it. We're trying, but there are cultural nuances we're missing. The Torks keep referencing something about shadow boundaries, that our translators say means territorial markers, but the mothers say means spiritual concepts. Every time we think we understand, we find out we've made it worse." The situation on Belloc 7 escalated. Violence broke out. 12 Torax and 8 mothers died before Council peacekeepers restored order. The two communities were separated, but the damage was done. 30 years of peaceful coexistence destroyed in a week. Jathor reviewed the incident reports late one night. Something nagged at her. She searched the historical records and found similar incidents. 5 years ago, a near-identical situation had occurred on Belloc 7. Different issues, but the same cultural tensions. In that case, a human mediator named David Chen had resolved it in 3 days. She read his report, trying to understand what he had done differently. His notes mentioned understanding the shadow boundary concept, which he explained was both territorial and spiritual, requiring solutions that addressed both aspects simultaneously. He had brought the two groups together for a series of informal meals, letting them share food and stories while he facilitated conversation. It sounded simple, but the Council's trained mediators had not thought of it. They had focused on legal frameworks and logical arguments. Jacksonor wondered what David Chen was doing now. Probably back on Earth, living his short human life, happy to be away from Council problems. The problems kept accumulating. Small things, mostly annoying things, but they added up. A station life support system failed for 3 hours before technicians figured out the problem. Nobody died, but 300 beings were evacuated and 12 were hospitalized. The maintenance log showed that a human technician named Rodriguez had been performing weekly checks on that exact system for 8 years. After she left, the checks had been reassigned to a local crew who did not know what to look for. A medical database became corrupted, mixing up patient records for 3 different species. Doctors prescribed medications designed for pelthine biology to thorax patients. Fortunately, someone caught the error before anyone was hurt. The investigation revealed that humans had been running verification subroutines on the database every night. Nobody else had known the subroutines existed. 2 ships collided in a busy trade corridor because the traffic control system routed them to the same coordinates at the same time. Both crews survived, but the ships were destroyed. The traffic control AI insisted it had calculated everything correctly. Engineers discovered that humans had been manually reviewing height traffic routes and adjusting them to account for different species' reaction times and ship handling characteristics. Without those adjustments, the AI's calculations were technically correct, but practically dangerous. In the council chambers, sessions started running longer. Debates that used to take hours now stretched across days. Ambassadors who used to understand each other with ease now found themselves confused and frustrated. "I don't understand what the Qualani delegation is proposing," Ambassador Kelvarn said during one particularly contentious session. "We have explained it 3 times, responded Ambassador Thane coldly. "You've said words, but they don't make sense together." Arguments like this broke out constantly. Tempers grew short. Species that had been allies for centuries started viewing each other with suspicion. Cora watched it all with growing unease. She started doing something she never thought she would do. She started researching what humans had actually done during their 200 years on the Council. The more she researched, the more disturbed she became. Humans had served on the Central Translation Hub staff, not just as technicians, but as cultural consultants. They had been the ones teaching the automated systems about context, idioms, and cultural nuance. Translation was not just about converting words from one language to another. It was about understanding what those words meant to different species, with different histories and different ways of thinking. Humans, for some reason, had been exceptionally good at this. Humans had worked in infrastructure maintenance across council space. They had not just fixed things when they broke. They had anticipated problems and prevented them. They had optimized systems, making them run smoother and more efficiently. They had maintained equipment with a thoroughness that other species found excessive. "Why repair something before it breaks?" the Thorax maintenance chief had asked. The humans had tried to explain about preventive maintenance, but others saw it as wasted effort. Humans had served as cultural liaison between species. This was perhaps their most valuable role, and the one Jor had most taken for granted. Humans somehow understood everyone. They could talk to the emotional pelting and the logical Quani with equal ease. They knew when to use formal language and when to be casual. They understood jokes across species barriers. They caught misunderstandings before they became problems, and humans had coordinated disaster responses. Jor pulled up the records of the last major disaster before humanity left. An earthquake on the mining colony of Thalvin had killed thousands. The human-led response team had saved 30,000 lives through rapid coordinated action involving 17 different species emergency services. She compared it to the disaster response 3 weeks ago, a similar earthquake on Freelon 9. The response had been chaotic. 12 different emergency teams arrived, but they could not coordinate effectively. Different species used different protocols. Communication broke down. Arguments erupted about who was in charge. 40,000 beings died on Freon 9. Most of them did not die from the earthquake. They died because help arrived too late, or in the wrong form. Jathor sat in her dark office, staring at the statistics. She felt something she had rarely felt in her 70 years as an ambassador. Fear. The small problems were not small at all. They were symptoms of something much larger. Humanity had not held minor positions. They had held critical positions. They had been everywhere doing everything, holding the council together in ways nobody had noticed, because they made it look easy. She drafted a report to High Chancellor Vormik. Then she deleted it. He would dismiss her concerns. Everyone would. The problems were still minor enough to ignore. Trade was still flowing, just less efficiently. Communication still worked, just less smoothly. Disaster still got responses, just with more casualties. Nobody wanted to admit that humanity's departure mattered. Not yet. 1 year after humanity withdrew, Ambassador Jathor woke to alarms screaming through her quarters. Emergency protocols activated automatically, bathing everything in red light. Her communication system was going crazy with incoming messages, each one flagged as urgent. She scrambled to her console and opened the priority channel. High Chancellor Vormek's face appeared, and even through the screen, she could see his panic. Emergency council session in 1 hour. All ambassadors must attend. This is not optional. The channel closed before she could ask questions. Jor dressed quickly and rushed to the council chambers. Other ambassadors were arriving in similar states of confusion and alarm. The chamber filled faster than she had ever seen, everyone demanding to know what was happening. Vormek took the central platform. He looked like he had aged a decade overnight. Station Thalath is being evacuated, he announced without preamble. Life support is failing. 20,000 beings need to be relocated within 6 hours. Station Thalor was one of the oldest council stations, a massive structure that had orbited the gas giant Thal for 3,000 years. It was home to research facilities, diplomatic offices, and a civilian population. 20,000 beings lived and worked there. How did this happen? Ambassador Grenog demanded. We don't know yet. The environmental systems began malfunctioning this morning, cascading failures across multiple redundant systems. Engineers are trying to identify the cause, but evacuation is the priority. 6 hours is not enough time, Jahor said. We need at least 12 hours to evacuate that many beings. We don't have 12 hours. Oxygen levels are dropping faster than predicted. We have the time we have. The council scrambled into emergency mode. Ships were dispatched. Evacuation protocols were activated. Ambassadors coordinated with their home governments to send help. It was chaos. Pure chaos. Ships arrived at the station, but could not dock efficiently because the automated docking system was malfunctioning. Manual docking was possible, but much slower. Evacuees packed into ships designed for cargo, not passengers. 3 different species needed different atmospheric conditions, requiring hasty modifications to ship environments. Communication between the evacuation ships was a nightmare. Captains could barely understand each other through the degraded translation systems. Orders were misunderstood. Ships were sent to the wrong docking ports. Evacuation routes became bottlenecked. Jathor watched the live feeds with growing horror. This should have been a smooth operation. The council had evacuation protocols. They had emergency procedures, but everything that could go wrong did go wrong. In the end, they evacuated Station Thalmera with 47 minutes to spare before life support completely failed. But the evacuation was a disaster. 17 beings died in the crush at docking ports. Hundreds more were injured. Families were separated. Essential equipment was left behind. Research data spanning centuries was lost. And worst of all, Nobody could figure out what had caused the failure in the first place. The maintenance logs show regular inspections. The head engineer reported to a grim council. Everything should have been working, but it's like the systems degraded all at once. Every redundant backup failed simultaneously. It should have been impossible. Jagor requested access to the historical maintenance records. She found what she was looking for and wished she had not. For 15 years, a human engineering team led by someone named Maria Santos had maintained Station Thelmarath's life support systems. They had not just performed standard maintenance. They had continuously upgraded and optimized the systems, replacing components before they showed signs of wear, adjusting algorithms to account for changing usage patterns, monitoring stress indicators that were not part of standard protocols. After they left, maintenance had continued according to official protocols: check the systems once a month, run diagnostics, replace components when they fail, standard procedure. Except standard procedure had not been enough. The station had been living on borrowed time, coasting on the foundation the humans had built. When that foundation finally degraded past a critical threshold, everything collapsed at once. Jyothar tried to present this information to the council, but nobody wanted to hear it. Acknowledging that humanity's absence had caused this disaster would mean admitting they had made a terrible mistake in letting humans leave. It would mean accepting that humans had been far more important than anyone had believed. It was easier to blame the disaster on bad luck, on old equipment, on anything except the truth. But the disaster at Station Thalmath was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, the Grand Council communication network began collapsing. The network connected 847 species across thousands of systems, allowing real-time communication and data sharing. It was the nervous system of Council civilization. It started with slowdowns. Messages took minutes instead of seconds to arrive, then hours. Then some messages did not arrive at all. Sectors began losing connection with the central hubs. Within days, whole regions of Council space were cut off from each other. Engineers worked frantically to identify the problem. They found hundreds of problems. The network was incredibly complex, built layer by layer over thousands of years. Different species had contributed different technologies. It was a magnificent achievement of cooperative engineering. It was also a nightmare to maintain, and it turned out that humans had been the ones maintaining it. They had been the thread connecting all the different technologies, the ones who understood how Thorax encryption protocols interfaced with Quilani data compression, how Methrian routing algorithms worked with Pelline security systems. They had been the translators not just of language, but of technology itself. Without them, the network was falling apart. Trade dropped 63% in the next 3 months. Without reliable communication, merchants could not coordinate shipments. Worlds that depended on imported food shortages. Factories shut down without raw materials. Unemployment skyrocketed. The economic collapse triggered political instability. Species began to distrust each other. Ancient grievances long buried under centuries of cooperation resurfaced. Old enemies remembered why they had been enemies. War broke out in 4 different sectors. Not major wars, not yet, but the kind of bitter territorial disputes that had been unthinkable for generations. Species that had been at peace for centuries suddenly found themselves shooting at each other over resource disputes that should have been resolved through negotiation. But negotiation required communication, required mediation, required trust, and all of those things were breaking down. Jyothar attended an emergency session where 3 different ambassadors nearly came to violence on the council floor. The argument had started over mining rights, but had escalated into personal insults and threats. Vormek had to call security to separate them. "This is insane," Jazur shouted afterward at a private gathering of senior ambassadors. "We're better than this. We're supposed to be civilized." "Civilized?" Ambassador Rethvar said bitterly. "We were civilized when humans were here making sure we stayed civilized. Now we're showing who we really are." That comment sparked an argument that lasted 3 hours. Some ambassadors defended the council, insisting they did not need humans to maintain order. Others reluctantly admitted that things had been better before. Then came the plague on Kalon Prime, and any remaining illusions shattered. The disease appeared suddenly, spreading through the quality population of the core world. It was a known illness, something that had been documented and treated successfully for decades. The cure existed. It was simple to manufacture, but nobody could find the protocols. The medical database had fractured, along with the communication network. Different hospitals had different versions of patient records and treatment protocols. The cure for the Keltine plague was known, but the exact specifications for manufacturing it were scattered across a dozen different databases that could no longer communicate with each other. Medical teams tried to reconstruct the treatment from fragmented records. They synthesized 6 different versions based on incomplete data. 3 did nothing. 2 made patients worse. 1 seemed to work, but not reliably enough. While doctors scrambled to find the answer, the plague spread. Millions fell ill. Hundreds of thousands died. A team of researchers finally discovered the complete treatment protocol in an archived database that nobody had known existed. By then, 2 million beings had died. Jethor attended the memorial service on Kelron Prime. She stood with ambassadors from dozens of species, all of them listening to the names of the dead being read aloud. It took 6 hours. She felt numb. This was not supposed to happen. The council was advanced. They had technology. They had knowledge. They should have been able to stop a known disease easily. After the service, she returned to her quarters and did something she had been avoiding for months. She accessed the deep archives and pulled up every record of human activity in the council over the past 200 years. She read for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, forgetting to eat. Her staff worried about her, but she ignored them. She had to understand what she found was staggering. Humans had not just held positions in the council. They had been woven into every aspect of council civilization. They were maintenance workers and engineers, doctors and mediators, teachers and administrators, programmers and analysts. They worked in hospitals and schools, on stations and ships, and offices and factories. And everywhere they went, they made things better. Not through grand gestures or revolutionary technology, through small, constant improvements, through paying attention to details others missed, through solving problems before they became crises. Most importantly, they connected things. The council was made up of 847 different species, each with their own way of thinking, their own priorities, their own communication styles. That diversity was the council's greatest strength, but it was also a tremendous challenge. How did you make 847 different species work together? The answer was humans. They had been the glue. They understood everyone just well enough to help everyone understand each other. They translated not just words, but concepts. Not just information, but intentions. They saw patterns across species barriers. They built bridges between cultures. Jethor found documentation of a council systems analysis done by a human researcher named Dr. Catherine Park just 2 years before humanity withdrew. The report had never been widely circulated. Park had written, "The council believes it operates through formal structures, governments, councils, committees, protocols. But the real work of the council happens in the spaces between these structures. It happens when a thorax engineer needs to explain a technical problem to a Pelanin administrator, when a mother needs to treat a Qualani patient, when a Krenon diplomat needs to understand why a Draven is offended. The formal structures create the framework, but humans provide the connections that make the framework function. We are, for better or worse, the unofficial nervous system of council civilization. If we ever leave, the council will not collapse immediately, but over time, without these millions of small connections being maintained, the whole system will degrade. I hope I'm wrong." She had not been wrong. She closed the report and sat in the darkness of her quarters. Outside, the council was falling apart. Species were withdrawing to protect their own interests. Wars were spreading. The economy was in freefall. The communication networks were dying. The council had stood for 8,000 years. It might not survive 8 more. And the worst part, it was not too late to fix it. Humanity still existed. They were just beyond the borders, living their lives, leaving the council to face the consequences of their own arrogance. Jor had dismissed humans as too emotional, too chaotic, too strange. She had never bothered to understand what they actually did. None of them had. Now she understood, and the understanding came far, far too late. 2 years after humanity withdrew, the Galactic Council was dying. 23 species had officially left, withdrawing to protect their own interests. Another 40 were on the verge of leaving. Open warfare had spread to 7 sectors. The economy had contracted by 40%. Communication between remaining members was sporadic at best. High Chancellor Vormek looked like a shell of his former self. His once impressive presence had withered. He moved slowly, spoke quietly, and seemed perpetually exhausted. Ambassador Jarrah had changed too. She no longer cared about the political maneuvering that had defined her career. She had one goal now: save what could be saved. And she knew there was only one way to do that. "We need to ask humanity to return," she said, at a gathering of senior ambassadors. The room fell silent. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Ambassador Grenog let out a bitter laugh. "Ask them to return after we dismissed them, after we made it clear they were not wanted." "Yes," Shaor said firmly, "because without them, the Council will not survive another year. We survived for 8,000 years before they joined. We were different then. We had not built our civilization around their contributions. We did not have systems that depended on their maintenance. We were independent. Now we are not. Now we need them." "I will not beg," Ambassador Threen said coldly. "Then billions will die," Jar replied. "Is your pride worth that?" The debate raged for hours. Some ambassadors refused to consider asking humanity for help. Others reluctantly agreed it might be necessary. A few, like Jaffor, insisted it was the only option. In the end, Vormek made the decision. "We will send a delegation to human space," he announced. "We will ask humanity to return to the Council. We will offer whatever is necessary to convince them." He looked directly at Jor. "You will lead the delegation." She had expected this. She was one of the few who had been willing to admit the truth about humanity's importance. That made her the logical choice, even if it felt like punishment. The delegation consisted of 5 ambassadors representing the major species factions: Jathor, Grulnog, Rethavar, Threen, and a young Draveen named Kelmith, who had not been on the Council when humanity left. They traveled in the diplomatic vessel Unity's Promise, a ship whose name now felt like cruel irony. The journey to the edge of human space took 6 days. 6 days of preparing speeches and arguments, of debating how to convince humanity to come back. When they reached the border, they broadcast diplomatic protocols and requested permission to enter human space for negotiations. The response was automated. "Humanity is no longer participating in Galactic Council affairs. Please do not enter human space. Any vessels approaching will be turned back. Thank you for your understanding." They had expected this. Jathor broadcast again, this time adding emergency diplomatic codes that indicated a matter of extreme urgency. "This is Ambassador Jathor of the Galactic Council. We request an audience with human leadership. The matter concerns the survival of billions of beings. Please, we need to speak with someone." Silence. For 3 hours, they received no response. Then a new message arrived. "A representative will meet with you at Outpost Gamma 7. Coordinates attached. 1 ship only. No weapons. You have 12 hours. They took it. It was more than they had hoped for. Outpost Gamma 7 turned out to be a small station at the very edge of human space. It was clearly designed as a border checkpoint. Functional but not welcoming. They docked without incident and were escorted to a meeting room by silent human security personnel. The room was simple: a table, chairs designed for various species anatomies, and nothing else. No decorations, no windows, no hints of human culture or personality. It felt deliberate. They were not being invited into human space. They were being kept at arm's length. They waited for 20 minutes. Then a single human entered. She was middle-aged by human standards, with gray hair pulled back severely. She wore a simple uniform with captain's insignia. Her face showed no emotion at all. "I am Captain Sarah Chen," she said, her words translated perfectly by their personal devices. The Council's translation systems had degraded, but apparently personal units still worked if properly maintained. "I have been authorized to meet with you. You have 1 hour." 1 hour? That was all the time humanity was willing to give them. Jor stood. "Captain Chen, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. We come representing the Galactic Council to discuss." "I know why you're here," Chen interrupted. "Things are falling apart. You need help. You want humanity to return to the Council." Her directness was jarring. Council diplomacy involved layers of courtesy and careful phrasing. But perhaps that was the problem. Perhaps humans had been patient with council protocols for 200 years, and their patience had run out. Yes, Jaith said simply. We need humanity to return. Why? The question hung in the air. Why? Such a simple word. Such a complicated answer. Ambassador Grulnog spoke up. Because the council is failing without you. Systems are collapsing. Species are at war. Millions have died. We realize now that humanity's contributions were more significant than we understood. You realize now, Chen repeated, her tone flat. 2 years after we left, after 2 million died in a plague because you couldn't find treatment protocols, after station was evacuated, after your communication network collapsed, now you realize. Yes, Jaith said, we were blind. We did not understand what humanity did for the council. We took you for granted. We dismissed you. We were wrong. Chen's expression did not change. Go on. We are here to offer humanity's return to the council, Jachor continued. We are prepared to offer significant concessions, seats on the High Council, economic privileges, first-tier diplomatic status, control over any departments you wish. We will formally apologize for how humanity was treated. We will build memorials honoring human contributions. We will do whatever is necessary. She had expected these offers to have impact. They were extraordinary concessions. Vormek had given her authority to promise almost anything. Chen sat in silence for a long moment. Then she spoke. Do you know why humanity left the council? We assumed. There were grievances? Jor said carefully. Grievances, Chen repeated. That's one way to put it. Let me tell you about my cousin Marcus. He was a maintenance engineer on Station Thelarath for 15 years. He maintained those life support systems. He worked 70-hour weeks. He trained local staff. But they never quite got it, because they didn't think preventive maintenance was important. They thought he was obsessive, paranoid even. He heard that criticism for 15 years. Chen's voice remained emotionless, but something cold had entered her eyes. When humanity decided to withdraw, Marcus wanted to stay. He argued that people needed him. The council told him that his work was appreciated but not essential, that local staff could handle it. He left them detailed documentation anyway. 47 volumes, 600 hours of training videos. Everything he knew about those systems. She paused. Station Thaler was evacuated 11 months after he left. 17 beings died in the evacuation. Marcus watched it on the news. He hasn't spoken to anyone in 3 weeks. We're concerned he might hurt himself. Jethur felt something cold settle in her chest. That's one story, Chen continued. I have thousands more. Dr. Park, who wrote that report you probably found, about humans being the council's nervous system. She spent 30 years studying council sociology. She predicted exactly what would happen if humanity left. Nobody listened. She died 6 months ago. Heart attack officially, but she died of a broken heart knowing that millions would suffer because of willful blindness. Chen leaned forward slightly. For 200 years, humanity did the work nobody else wanted to do. We fixed things, maintained things, connected things, mediated things. We worked ourselves to exhaustion trying to help. And what did we get? She began counting on her fingers. We were called primitive, too emotional, too individualistic, too chaotic. We were told we didn't fit in, that we should learn proper protocols, that our ways were inefficient. We were passed over for promotions because we weren't team players. Even as we held the team together, we were given the jobs nobody else wanted, and then told those jobs weren't important. Ambassador Threen shifted uncomfortably. We did not understand. No, you didn't, Chen agreed. And you didn't want to understand. You were comfortable with us doing the work while you took credit for the council's success. You were happy to have us in the background, invisible. As long as everything ran smoothly. We acknowledge our mistakes, Jafar said desperately. That is why we are here to make amends. Amends, Chen said softly. You want to make amends. 2 years too late for 2 million dead. 2 years too late for thousands of human workers who burned out trying to save systems you wouldn't maintain. 2 years too late for all the beings who died in wars that we could have prevented. She stood up. Let me be clear. This is not about holding a grudge. This is not about revenge. This is about reality. Humanity tried for 200 years to be part of the council. We gave everything we had, and you made it clear over and over that we were not wanted. Not really. We were tolerated, used, but never valued. We value you now, Grenog said. Because you need us, Chen shot back. Not because you respect us. Not because you appreciate us. Because your civilization is collapsing, and you need someone to fix it again. She picked up a data storage device from her pocket and placed it on the table. This contains everything. Every protocol, every procedure, every optimization, every system design, every maintenance schedule, every mediation technique, everything humanity learned and implemented during our 200 years in the council. It's all yours. Jor stared at the device. You're giving this to us? Yes, because despite everything, we don't want beings to suffer. We don't want wars. We don't want systems to collapse. We don't want people to die. That's who we are. That's what you never understood about us. Chen walked toward the door, then paused. You have everything you need to rebuild. All the knowledge is there. All the procedures. All the systems. What you don't have is what made humanity effective. Our ability to connect with everyone, to understand everyone, to care about everyone, even when they don't care about us. You can learn it maybe over time with effort, but you'll have to do it yourselves. Please, Jethor said, and hated the desperation in her voice. Please reconsider. We need you. You had us, Chen replied. For 200 years, you had us. You just never bothered to notice. She opened the door. Humanity wishes the Galactic Council well. We hope you rebuild. We hope you learn. We hope you create something better than what you had. But we're done. We gave you everything we had. We have nothing left to give. Will you ever return? Kelmuth asked. He was young, and his voice held genuine sorrow. Chen looked at him for a long moment. Maybe someday, when you've built something worth joining. When you've proven you understand the value of cooperation, empathy, and respect. When you treat all species as equals, not just the powerful ones. When you do the work yourselves instead of expecting others to do it for you. When that day comes, if it comes, ask us again. How long? Kelmuth whispered. Generations, probably. Maybe centuries. Maybe never. That's up to you. She left. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded final. The 5 ambassadors sat in silence, staring at the small data device on the table. It contained everything they needed to rebuild. Everything, except the people who could make it work. The journey back to council space was quiet. Nobody spoke much. They all understood that they had failed. Not because humanity had refused to help. They had provided more help than the council deserved. They had failed because there was no way to fix what had been broken. You could not rebuild trust destroyed over 200 years in one meeting. You could not repair relationships that had never really existed. You could not force people to return to a place that had never truly been their home. When they arrived back at council headquarters, Vormek was waiting. He looked at their faces and knew the answer before anyone spoke. They said no. Yes, Jor said. She placed the data device on his desk. But they gave us this, everything we need to rebuild. Vormek picked it up. This tiny object containing the accumulated knowledge of 200 years of human work. Will it be enough? I don't know, Jaith said honestly. We have the information, but information was never the problem. The problem was us. She left Vormek alone with his thoughts and the weight of what humanity had given them in their absence. One last gift from a species that had every right to let the council collapse. In human space, Captain Sarah Chen returned to her quarters on Earth and allowed herself to feel for the first time since the meeting. She cried for Marcus, for Dr. Park, for all the humans who had given so much and received so little appreciation. But she also felt hope. The council had their information. Maybe they would learn. Maybe they would grow. Maybe someday they would build something worth rejoining. Until then, humanity would watch and wait and hope they had made the right choice. 20 years had passed since humanity withdrew from the Galactic Council. Ambassador Jawor was old now, even by Creasine standards. Her forearms moved more slowly than they used to. Her eyes had dimmed, but her mind remained sharp, and she had work to do, more work than ever. The council chambers were smaller now. Only 400 species remained as members. The grand spiral of seats that had once held representatives from 847 species now showed vast gaps. Some sections had been closed off entirely, the empty seats a reminder of what had been lost. But the chamber was full of activity. Species that remained were actually working together, talking to each other, solving problems. The sessions were messier than they used to be. Arguments broke out frequently. Progress was slow, but it was real progress, not the illusion of cooperation that had existed before. Jackthor watched the session from her seat. They were debating agricultural technology sharing between 3 species, whose worlds were facing food shortages due to climate changes. The debate had been going on for 6 hours. 20 years ago, humans would have mediated this discussion and reached a solution in 2 hours. Now the species had to figure it out themselves. It was frustrating. It was inefficient. But it was teaching them something humans had always known. Cooperation was hard work. And there were no shortcuts. Ambassador Kelmuth, who had been young during the failed delegation to human space, was now a senior member of the council. He had dedicated his life to what he called the Renaissance Project, an effort to rebuild council civilization using human principles as a guide. "We cannot simply copy what humans did," he often said. "We must understand why they did it. We must develop our own capacity for empathy, mediation, and cooperation." The Renaissance Project had started small, with just a few dedicated members. Now, it had grown to include representatives from over 100 species. They studied human history, human psychology, human social structures. They tried to understand what made humans so effective at connecting different species. Some species mocked the project. "We're trying to become humans," they said dismissively. "We should focus on our own strengths." But Kelmuth always responded the same way. "We're not trying to become humans. We're trying to become better versions of ourselves by learning from their example." The council had split into regional factions after humanity left. Some regions had completely collapsed. The Thorax Confederation had descended into civil war that lasted 8 years. The Mother Alliance had become increasingly isolated and authoritarian, rejecting outside contact entirely. But other regions had slowly rebuilt. They used the information humanity had provided. They studied the protocols. They implemented the systems. It was hard work. They made mistakes. But gradually things improved. The central translation hub had been rebuilt from the ground up. It took 5 years, and the combined effort of dozens of species. The new system was not as good as what humanity had maintained. Translations were less nuanced, more literal, but it worked. Species could communicate. More importantly, the new translation teams included cultural specialists from each species. They did not just translate words. They tried to translate meaning, context, intent. They were learning what humans had always known. Communication was more than words. Infrastructure maintenance had improved, though it remained the Council's greatest challenge. The casual attitude toward preventive maintenance had changed after Bystation Themarath. Now engineers took maintenance seriously. They followed the human protocols. They checked systems before they failed. They documented everything. A young Peltine engineer named Sir had become famous for her work restoring the Council's orbital habitats. She had never met a human, but she studied everything humans had written about engineering philosophy. "Humans understood that infrastructure is not just metal and circuits," she said, in a speech that went viral across Council space. "It's about trust. When a being boards a station, they trust that the life support will work. That trust must be earned through constant, careful work. Not because anyone is watching, not because you'll be punished if you fail, but because lives depend on you." Humans understood this instinctively. We must learn it deliberately. Medical coordination had improved. After the plague that killed 2 million beings, the Council had completely rebuilt its medical database system. They created redundancies. They trained specialists in data management. They established protocols for sharing information during emergencies. When another plague hit 12 years after humanity left, the Council's response was faster. The cure was located and distributed within weeks instead of months. Thousands died instead of millions. It was still a tragedy, but it proved the Council was learning. Disaster response remained difficult. The Council had established new emergency protocols based on human documentation, But coordination between species was still challenging. Different cultures had different ideas about leadership, chain of command, and priorities. A major earthquake on Telvine 4, 6 years after humanity withdrew, had been a disaster. 30,000 dead. The response was chaotic and ineffective, but the Council learned from it. They established joint training exercises. They created cross-species emergency teams. They practiced working together. When another earthquake hit, Flynn 7-10 years later, the response was better. Different species worked together. Communication was clearer. Lives were saved. Not as many as if humans had been there to coordinate, but more than would have been saved before. The Council was learning slowly, painfully, but learning. Wars had been the greatest challenge. After humanity left, old grievances resurfaced. Species that had coexisted peacefully for generations suddenly remembered ancient conflicts. Territory disputes, resource competition, cultural misunderstandings, all led to violence. The first wars were terrible. Without human mediators, conflicts escalated quickly. Peace was nearly impossible to achieve, because nobody trusted anyone else to arbitrate fairly. 3 wars lasted over 5 years each, but some younger ambassadors inspired by the Renaissance Project started trying human mediation techniques. They studied human methods. They practiced active listening. They tried to understand not just what species wanted, but why they wanted it. It did not always work. Some conflicts were too deep, too bitter. But gradually, a new generation of council mediators emerged. They were not as good as humans had been. They lacked humanity's natural empathy and cultural flexibility. But they tried, and sometimes trying was enough. Jor had become one of these mediators. She spent her final years traveling to conflict zones, sitting with angry species, listening to grievances, trying to find common ground. It was exhausting work. She failed more often than she succeeded, but every success saved lives. She thought often about the humans she had known, about the ones she had dismissed and ignored, about Captain Sarah Chen's words during that final meeting. "You had us for 200 years. You just never bothered to notice." She had spent 20 years trying to make up for that failure. She would spend whatever time she had left doing the same. The Council's economy had stabilized, though it never recovered to its previous size. Trade networks were smaller, more regional. Species traded with neighbors and trusted partners rather than across the entire Council space. It was less efficient, but more stable. Some species had prospered in the new reality. The Qualani Collective had embraced the Renaissance Project principles and built a thriving regional economy based on cooperation and mutual benefit. Others, like the Mother Alliance, had retreated into isolation and stagnation. The Torcs, after their long civil war had emerged, transformed. They had been humbled by their suffering and had become some of the strongest advocates for learning from humanity's example. Former Ambassador Grillnog, now elderly, had written a book called The Price of Arrogance, about the Council's failure to value humanity. "We thought we were superior because we were older," he wrote. "Because our civilizations had existed for thousands of years, we looked at humanity's young civilization and saw them as children. But wisdom is not about age. It's about understanding, and humans understood things about cooperation and empathy that we in all our ancient pride had forgotten or never learned." The book was controversial, but widely read. It sparked debates across council space about values, cooperation, and what it meant to be civilized. Jethor stood in her private quarters, looking at the data device Captain Chen had given them 20 years ago. She had kept a copy, studied it endlessly. She knew its contents better than almost anyone. The protocols, the procedures, the systems, all brilliant in their simplicity once you understood the philosophy behind them. But the device was not enough. It had never been enough. Information could not replace understanding. Protocols could not replace empathy. Systems could not replace people. That was humanity's final lesson, the most important one. A message alert chimed. Jethor opened it and felt her heart skip. It was from human space, the first official communication in 20 years. The message was simple. "To the Galactic Council, we have been watching your progress. We see that you are trying. We see that you are learning. This message is not a commitment, but an acknowledgement. You are moving in the right direction. Keep going. Admiral Sarah Chen, Human Diplomatic Corps. Jor read it 3 times. Then she sent a reply, knowing it might take weeks to reach human space. Admiral Chen, we received your message. We are trying to build something worth your return. We do not know if we will succeed. We do not know if we will succeed in our lifetimes, but we are learning. Thank you for watching. Thank you for hoping. Humanity taught us that the work is what matters, not the recognition. We understand now, Ambassador Jower. She sent the message and sat back, feeling something she had not felt in years. Hope. That evening, the Council held a special ceremony. It happened every year on the anniversary of humanity's withdrawal. At first, it had been a memorial, a way to mark what had been lost. Over time, it had evolved into something else, a reminder, a commitment, a promise to do better. The Council. Chambers filled with representatives from every species. Even those who had left the Council sent observers. At the center of the chamber stood a new statue, unveiled 5 years earlier. It showed a figure in maintenance gear, datapad in hand, standing at the intersection of multiple paths. The figure was human. The plaque read to humanity, who held us together when we refused to hold ourselves. May we learn to be the bridge they were. High Chancellor Kelvak, a young Dravine who had taken over after Vormek's death, spoke to the assembled beings. 20 years ago, humanity left us to face the consequences of our own arrogance. We had taken them for granted. We had dismissed their contributions. We had never truly valued what they did for us. In the years since, we have learned hard lessons. Millions have died teaching us what humans tried to tell us peacefully. That cooperation requires work. That diversity requires empathy. That civilization requires everyone's effort. He paused, looking around the chamber. We have not rebuilt what we had. Perhaps we never will. Perhaps we should not. What we had before was built on the unacknowledged labor of one species holding everyone else together. What we are building now is different, slower, messier, but it is ours. We are learning to hold ourselves together. Today, we received a message from humanity. They have been watching. They see our efforts. They acknowledge our progress. This is not a promise of their return, but it is hope. And hope is enough to keep trying. He gestured to the statue. Humanity left us with one final gift, the chance to learn who we could become. To learn if we could be better every day. We must choose to accept that gift. We must choose to do the work. We must choose to be better than we were. The ceremony ended in silence. No applause, no celebration, just thousands of beings contemplating what had been lost and what might still be built. Later that night, Jor stood alone in the empty council chambers. She looked at the statue of the human worker, forever standing at the intersection of paths, forever connecting, forever serving. We're trying, she whispered to the silent statue. It's slow, it's hard. We make mistakes, but we're trying. I hope that's enough. I hope someday you'll see what we've built and think it's worth joining. She turned to leave, then paused. From her robes, she pulled out a small object, her personal data device that she carried everywhere. On it was saved every piece of human writing she could find. History, philosophy, literature, technical manuals, personal journals. She had been studying humanity for 20 years, trying to understand what made them special. She had found some answers. Humans had evolved on a world of extreme diversity, which taught them to adapt, to communicate, to find common ground. They had short lives, which made them value time and urgency. They had overcome tremendous challenges in their own history, which taught them resilience. But beyond all that, humans had chosen to care. That was the key. They could have kept to themselves, focused on their own civilization, avoided the complicated mess of the Galactic Council. Instead, they had joined. They had helped. They had given everything they had to beings who often did not appreciate them. And when they left, they still left behind everything needed to rebuild. Because even after being dismissed and undervalued, they still cared about preventing suffering. That was humanity's greatest gift, not their skills or knowledge or technology. Their choice to care, even when caring was not rewarded. The Council was learning to make that same choice, to care about each other, to help each other, to hold each other up, not because it was easy or profitable or recognized, but because it was right. In human space, Admiral Sarah Chen sat in her office on Earth, looking at Ambassador Jayeth's reply. She was old now, gray and lined, but her eyes were still sharp, still assessing. "They're learning," she said aloud to the empty room. "Slowly, but they're learning." She thought about Marcus, her cousin, who had maintained Station Theolorith. He was still alive, though he struggled with what had happened. She thought about Dr. Park, who had died knowing her warnings were ignored. She thought about thousands of human workers who had given years of their lives to the Council. "Maybe," she said softly, "maybe someday, not in my lifetime, probably not in my children's lifetime, but maybe someday, they'll build something worth joining, something that values everyone's contribution, something that understands cooperation is not a weakness but the greatest strength." She opened a secure channel to the Human Council, the governing body that had replaced humanity's council representation. "I recommend we maintain observation of council space. They are progressing. In another generation or two, we should reevaluate contact." The response came quickly. "Agreed. Continue monitoring. No direct contact unless they request it. Let them learn on their own." Chen closed the channel and looked out her window at Earth below. Humanity was thriving. They had built new alliances with species outside the Council, relationships based on mutual respect rather than utility. They had turned inward, focusing on their own development and growth. They had healed from the pain of being unappreciated, but they still watched, still hoped, still believed that someday the galaxy might build something worth being part of again. In the council chambers, Jathor turned off the lights and left. The statue remained in darkness, a silent guardian of memory and hope. The council had 20 years of hard lessons behind them. They had generations of work ahead, but for the first time since humanity left, they were truly working together. Not perfectly, not easily, but genuinely. Humanity had withdrawn quietly, leaving the council to face consequences. Those consequences had been devastating, but they had also been necessary. The council was learning to stand on its own, to be responsible for its own civilization, to value what they had before it was gone. It was a hard lesson, the hardest many species had ever learned. But some lessons could only be learned through loss. And somewhere between the Council's struggle and humanity's quiet hope, perhaps something new was being born. Something better than what had come before. Something that might one day be worth rejoining. The galaxy turned. Time passed. And slowly, painfully, beings learned what humans had always known. That civilization was not about technology, or power, or ancient glory. It was about choosing every day to care for each other, to do the work, to be the bridge. Humanity had been that bridge for 200 years. Now others were learning to build bridges of their own. It would take time, but time was something the galaxy had in abundance. And hope, it turned out, was surprisingly durable. Even after everything, hope remained. Perhaps that too was a gift humanity had left behind.